Okay, so we're now recording.
All right.
So, Sue, tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Susan White. I am the librarian here at University of Advancing Technology. I oversee the entire library, all 1,400 square feet of it, and all of our electronic space, which is much, much larger.
Yes. So tell us, just give us an overview of what UAT is.
We are a college that is training students to be technologists. And so our focus as an institution is to ensure that our students are capable of creating technology in 20 years when we can't even define what it will be. So our idea of teaching is a little bit different because we understand that fundamentally the practical skills that our students are learning right now could technically be irrelevant in 10 years. So how do you actually build a technologist? And I'm building my library around building technologists. And technologists need to be intellectually agile and always, always curious about technology. So my library doesn't exactly look like your traditional college library, and it should never, because it just wouldn't meet the needs of our student body.
So what does your library collect?
We have a core collection in QA 7676, and for all the librarians out there, you will know that's programming. I want to say about 30% of our physical collection of monographs fits in with computer science programming and that area. Also, within Library of Congress, we're T heavy, and we also have a lot of art. So when you think about our collection, we don't have a tremendous amount of resources in history, for example, because the information-seeking needs of our students tend to be met in electronic resources. My students are more likely to go to a resource like ProQuest to search for their core classes and their general electives than they are to use a resource like a book. At one point, I purchased a really beautiful atlas because we need a little reference, like maybe 10 books. My reference section really can't take up much space because I need rooms for games. But this atlas, what was really interesting to me was seeing students whose frame of reference is electronic environment, flipping through an atlas and talking about it and comparing it to Google Earth. Because these were students who probably hadn't looked at an actual atlas since they were children. And so it was a kind of fun thing to watch them flipping through and remarking about how interesting it was that they couldn't zoom in on South Africa. Because that's their frame of reference. And so, all of our services are tailored towards technologists. And that puts me in an interesting position as a librarian because meeting the academic and curricular needs of students in electronic environments without as much supplementation from a physical collection is challenging because it's about establishing authority in electronic environments, and that's an issue that every single librarian I've ever spoken to has looked into, has had issues with, has had personal conflicts with. So that's what I do. I manage electronically. I think at a bigger institution, I would probably be considered a digital initiatives librarian based on my focus and how I serve students.
Okay. How do you go about selecting materials?
I go about selecting materials for our physical collection in a really quite a traditional way. I look at the curriculum, I look at the current programs that are being offered, I look at future programs that are being offered, and I look for the best resources. It's the exact same way every librarian does their collection development, but I'm always looking for electronic resources. So I'm not necessarily going out to resources like Booklist. I may be going out and looking at a field like robotics and asking myself some fundamental questions. What are the information-seeking needs of my students? How are they going to actually approach looking for information on robotics? And how do I meet that? Some of the resources that we provide for our students are better met in the form of a wiki and links out to authoritative resources than they are in terms of purchasing physical items for our collection. And so, it's the same method of traditional collection development, but it's in a totally different environment often.
So when you're selecting those e-resources that you're linking to off the wiki, what's the criteria you're using?
I'm looking for chains of authority. So I'm looking for, especially in technology, one of the really interesting things for me is that the publishing cycle and the frequency, pretty much the cycle of technological change are totally out of sync. So for example, to get an article in a peer-reviewed journal in a fast-moving technology field, well, that article that's in a peer-reviewed journal might be talking about old stuff by the time it actually gets published. So what I tend to look for my students are things that are happening right now. And sometimes there's a lot of different resources in every field of technology where information about what's happening right now is available. So there's that question. If I'm looking at someone who's trying to do a literature review in a technological area, there are definitely some scholarly academic resources that I would point them to, but I point my students to a lot of white papers. I point them to a lot of information that is current, because that's a real issue in technology. If you want someone to be aware of what's cutting edge, you cannot wait for peer review. Unless it's fun peer review, and by fun peer review I'm talking about peer review that happens immediately as soon as ideas are coming out. And a good example of that is there is an informal, very accurate peer review that happens in communities like Slashdot. Slashdot is a community of technologists that publish news stories about technology happenings around the world. And what's really fascinating with Slashdot is that if someone posts something that is inaccurate or incomplete, the community corrects that article and will pretty much invalidate the claims within a half an hour. And it is a phenomenal thing to watch because it's a community of technical experts. And it functions in some of the ways that a wiki does work. And Slashdot is a really good example of informal, immediate peer review. So if I send a student to Slashdot who's doing research on some topic that's actually cutting edge, they can get the inputs of hundreds of people immediately about the validity of the claim of some technologist. And that's incredible. And that's where I would like to see more library resources moving to. We don't need to wait 18 months to have something be approved for it to be a good idea, and especially not in technology. So selecting resources is a careful, cautious art. It relies on resources that I think a lot of my peers would consider informal and dangerous.
Such as?
Well, no, it's true. I mean, I think that there is a real challenge there in directing college students who are doing research to a resource like Slashdot. And as a librarian, it's my job to explain to them why Slashdot does have some authority and how to do research from Slashdot. So if there is a good idea there, how to branch out and to continue with good information literacy skills that reflect a high-tech environment. We're not doing a paper here on, Tolstoy. We don't have 200 years of information about a subject. We might be looking at a subject that's brand new. We might be looking at a subject that's so brand new it has 6 different names, and people around the world are talking about the same phenomenon in different ways. So that's the speed of the reference that we need to provide, and that's fun.